Hey, for anyone wondering why I started 3 minutes early, that's 100% on me. Oh man, my camera looks all fuzzy too. Well, here's hoping everybody can see me because I am live and there's 2 people watching already. Hi guys, I legit pressed the button 3 minutes early, so hi. I said that I was going to talk about the. Let me see if I can wipe off this smudge. It's got to be what it is, right? Well, that actually helps quite a bit, doesn't it? I said I was going to talk about being at G-Yard whenever we opened it. You see, I started my term, of course, as I've explained, at High Desert. Hi, Rudy Castro and the Silhouettes. Oh, I remember such an interesting name from the other time. I'm great. At G-Yard, whenever we opened it, because, as I said, I was at High Desert before, and, then I moved on. I went SNY, and I went to a bunch of places in SATF. One of them was G-Yard because we moved from A-Yard, the whole yard. They shut down A-Yard and moved about 800 inmates in the course of a day, clear across the prison, a solid half mile or so, to G-Yard, and we opened that yard up. Excuse me. We opened G-Yard up. And it was a really unique experience because usually opening a yard up, there's a lot of conflict. Guys legit kill each other. I joked about it just a little bit in the description. Not joked, but I talked about the description. And it's a real thing. Whenever you open up a yard in CDC, you're a little afraid because what if your gang or your group needs something? They need a set of tables that's theirs. They need a shower that's theirs. And some other group or gang wants to argue the point. It's a rare occurrence, but it does happen because you don't know how the yard's going to be set up. Maybe somebody's just going to be out. There's only enough showers for so many people to get it. There's only enough concrete for each group to have a good workout spot. When this happens, it's just guaranteed that everyone's going to have to assert their territory. That can mean blood. Unless you're deep SNY like I was. People were so polite about, hey, excuse me, man, do you mind if I set this here? Because the high profile SNY inmates, the real nasty pedophiles and things like that, if they feel bullied, if they say, well, that guy was pressing up on me and I don't like it and I'm scared, this is a yard they pretty much have set aside for these guys to program. Not everybody, but they're the priority. They can't go anywhere else. If I have a problem with a Roy Norris or a Greg Miley, they're going to move me, not them, because there's nowhere else to put them. There's 30 prisons to put me at, and some of them suck. And that's borne in mind whenever you interact with these people. As a result, you end up with a bunch of strange interactions. 50-50 yard. I know what you're talking about, L-Train, and I'm not really sure. I'm sorry, guys. I'm kind of a little cold or something, maybe. Look, B-Yard where I was, I heard that called a soft yard or a 50-50 yard because we were not good with the AB. And that was real clear. And it was a softer yard. The prison was gnarly. The yard I was at was pretty soft. I heard somebody else call it a 50-50 yard, but I legit never ran into a single person that owned having bad paperwork. And there was paperwork checks. Like whenever anybody came up, hey, what's your paperwork? So I heard that called a 50-50 yard. And if that's what it is, I definitely was there, but I don't think so. Straight SNY, bunch of nasty sex offenders everywhere, absolutely. But like pretending to be Rig, interacting with them, I think they started doing that after I left or something. The opening up G-Yard, everybody was so polite, and it was a great setup for a prison. F and G at SATF, and understand SATF, the prison I was at, stands for Substance Abuse Treatment Facility. And originally, it was supposed to have been just that. It was supposed to be 7 yards, numbered alphanumerically, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then their subsidiary buildings. And the whole prison was supposed to be set aside for drug addiction and cases where treatment was preferable to incarceration. But due to the severity of the person's issues, they had to be incarcerated. Of course, CDC was very crowded at this time, very, very crowded. They had 200,000 inmates, I think, in the system then. They've got a little over 100,000 now. But there's no more space. It's not like they got rid of the space. It's just they just kept building bunks where they had any place to build bunks. It was crazy. Before, they completely just recast SATF, the Substance Abuse Treatment Facility, as a housing, a warehouse facility. It had actually had some really good programs for people who wanted to get clean. F and G yard were the really good yards if you were in part of a substance abuse treatment program. Most famously, and I mentioned this recently, the actor Robert Downey Jr. ended up going to F yard. I don't recall when exactly. I think it was the early 2000s. I was never there whenever he was there, and I was on the yard across the street. I was on G yard rather than F, but they're built exactly the same. And it was interesting to be at I guess it's a privileged prison or whatever you'd call it. It's someplace set aside for guys that are doing well and the administration wants to reward in some way, or they want to make sure they weren't going to get in trouble. Most places, it's just row after row of bunk, and then someplace off to the side, there's like 6 toilets that you just share, and people pee all over the floor. It's disgusting, and yes, it's very well cleaned. There are guys whose job it is to go in there and scrub it, but it's often like a public restroom in a bad neighborhood. Some people just have no courtesy whenever they use these things, especially on the SNY side. On F and G yard, it wasn't like this at all. It was rooms, each of which had between 4 and 8 bunks, depending on how they determined your housing needs. And the rooms were huge, at least by prison standards. The rooms were the size of the bathroom at a nice restaurant, where there's enough room for a trough, I suppose, if they had them at a nice restaurant. I'd call it a 50 feet by 30 feet or something like that, an actual room where 4 guys could lie down end to end. It usually, like at San Quentin or High Desert, thank you, Matthew, if you wanted to bust out some burpees, maybe if you crammed all the way to the back of the cell and put your feet against the door, and your cellie crammed all the way to the back and put his back against the desk, and then you went down, did a set, and you came up, you'd still have to step back. So there'd be room for him to get down and do a set. And whenever guys talk about busting out burpees or anything like that, that's what they mean, is whatever you're comfortable with, maybe a set of 5 or 10, so that you have some time to get some wind while he's going down. And maybe even holler out cadence back and forth so that you keep each other motivated. You go, come on, Wood, 1, 2, 3, 1. And whatever your count is on your burpees, and that way you're using your wind the whole time if you're really trying to get that sweat and that cardio. It's an inconvenience to be bumping up against each other the whole time. Anybody who has done time has this complaint in a cell. You're right up against each other. These dorms at F and G yard, I remember it was me and my 3 friends busted out a program in the space between our bunks, and nobody bumped into anybody. There was enough room for 4 men to work out comfortably, being polite of each other's space, stepping back or whatever, just between the bunks. Whereas most places that I was at, it was a joke. I can't yawn like that, because if I do and my neighbor happens to be yawning, we're going to brush hands, and it's going to be really weird. You have to kind of look over and make sure you're not tapping hands with your neighbor if you stretch out. These are small things, but this is where you live. This thing that I'm doing right now, I had so many conflicts with neighbors over that, because it's constant, it's annoying, and I do understand, but if it's a reflex, if somebody's clearing their throat, or as I do, I clear my throat a lot, well, that's unfortunate, and there's no way to prevent little things like that. Maybe you have gas, maybe you snore. Dude, I don't know, maybe you're one of those guys who can't quit touching himself whenever other people are around. I'm not even trying to judge. I'm saying that these things, the more space you have, the more room you have to kind of do this and pretend you don't have to interact with whatever the guy's problem is next to you. Or if you are that guy, the more space the other people have to have it not be ruining their day to the point they have to, do something about it. Well, that's how, I don't know how to express how I feel SATF could have saved money by just giving more space to the inmates, because I know the violent incidents I saw, and there weren't that many. It's a soft prison. But geez, they were almost all because of this. And it's space, whether it's you as an individual or your group, that really is what opening up a new yard is about. It's like founding a new colony or landing on a new planet. There are no rules. Everybody's running around like the gold rush at trying to get their little piece of the pie, whether it's the job that they want that nobody else has quite figured out. Hey, if you go talk to the librarian, I bet you can get a library clerk job right now. And that's a desired job. That's the job I always wanted that I could never get, was the library clerk. And surprise, surprise, right? And I did speak recently in my video about being a visiting porter and how, because we had just opened G-Yard out of nowhere, those jobs were just up for grabs. I didn't go in and ask for it. And I'm sure there was a quick review of my file to make sure that I'd had jobs where I could have abused the authority and didn't. Because visiting porter, as I've expressed, that is a high profile job. Dude, if you want to sell out and maybe make $20,000 or probably go to prison for an extra 10 years and ruin your marriage or your girlfriend or your homie or whatever it is, ruin their life too, if that is the job to have to get that done. Of course, this wasn't my thing, but it was funny to have that handed to me. I didn't keep the job for very long, and I touched on it briefly in my video. Perhaps I'll even talk more about this is whenever they tried to move me. The reason that I wanted the visiting porter job, or the reason I didn't want the visiting porter job, but the reason that I wanted all of the clerk jobs that I'd had was for the Saturday, Sunday RDO, for the 2 days of visiting my wife, because she lived there in Corcoran and had sacrificed so much for those visits, the same as I had. Of course, that was the RDO I needed, and there are other places you can get it. I had a yard crew job one time that had that Saturday, Sunday RDO, and it was great. But clerk is the most common and the one that is most reliable, because there isn't enough people who can type, essentially, in CDC. I had my clerk job there, or my porter job there on G-Yard, and if I could have worked out some way to see my wife 2 days a week, they had a rule you couldn't visit while at work. And so even though I was a visiting porter, she was refused visiting me. I'll tell this story. It was awful. I believe my mother, my brother, my sister, my wife, and my nephew all came to visit me. And they were in the town of Corcoran on Friday night whenever I called a cell phone and said, hey, to be clear, I called one of their cell phones, not called from a cell phone, and said, hey, I just got this thing in the mail that says visiting porter. I start work tomorrow. I'm sure it'll be okay. And it was the next hour of my mother crying to the sergeant, explaining she hadn't seen me in, I think it was over a year at this point, and that it wasn't fair for them to just give me a slip of paper on Friday night saying I had a job and couldn't work and couldn't get my visit on Saturday and Sunday. They did make a dispensation. I imagine there's even some little note in my file, because the lieutenant had to sign it, that I was allowed to receive my visits so long as I still did my work in the visiting room on those 2 days. If I could have had some kind of dispensation to, extend that, so I just showed up early and swept and mopped and then visited with my wife, that would have been the coolest job in the world in prison. But sans that, I wasn't happy to have the job and would have traded it off to somebody else who would do a good job. That's part of vacating a job in prison, is you're expected to find a good replacement, somebody who will not just show up and take advantage of the situation. If you want your boss to, give you a good recommendation, let you out of the job because you can't leave, they have to sign that you don't work there anymore, or else you will be severely punished. That's usually the deal, is find somebody else who wants to do the job that I want here, and we'll talk. Unfortunately, they decided to move half of the inmates who had come to G Yard to Salinas Valley State Prison. And I was one of those half. And it was a real bummer because I was pretty well established and I loved the yard. And suddenly I was looking for any move to not go to Salinas. Step one was, start playing the I have a mental illness and I need medications that require you to not be someplace where you have to go inside because it's too hot. It's called the hot med list card. I realized that was a confusing sentence. What I mean to say is that in order to get out of the move, I got myself put on a list of inmates who can't move to Salinas Valley because they take psychiatric medications. I only took the medications for 3 days, and I had to do it while in a mental health crisis bed, which was brutal. I've done a video on the most inhumane conditions in CDC, in my opinion, and it's back there where they put the mentally ill who need the most help. It was inhumane in the most sterile and cold way. You were allowed to have I think a half hour of TV watching time every 4 hours or something like that, which is not bad for a mental hospital, essentially, people who are under constant observation. But they wouldn't allow you to stay shackled in tight like this. You had to have your hands handcuffed behind your back in a very uncomfortable way. And I just saw nobody take advantage of that. And it's the kind of thing which sounds good on paper. Well, we give the inmates a half hour of TV watching time every 4 hours so they can stay up on the news. You were also allowed to have somebody dictate a letter. If you wanted to send a letter, read any mail that you had received, you weren't allowed to touch it because mental health crisis bed. It was brutal in just the most sterile way where they were following the rules, but the rules were intrinsically inhumane. The rooms, 60 degrees, I guess, maybe 62, as many hospitals are very cold, and this was in the back of the prison hospital. But inmates in a mental health crisis bed aren't allowed clothes. You could hurt yourself with clothes. And so you're essentially nude except for what they called a safety vest and a security blanket, which are thick swaths of fabric that you can't use to hang yourself. But it was a very unpleasant way to spend about a week. And that is the end of how I lost my visiting porter job. Shalice Day Girl asked if the tight space in prisons was intentional or whether it was just a result of overpopulation. And that's an interesting question. Best as I can tell, prisons are kind of just designed the way that the guy designing the prison thought it should be, at least in California. I only saw a couple, but I've been interested in it since, and so I have actually looked up at what's available on the internet, and sadly it's not as much as you would think. I suppose actually that makes sense from a security standpoint, but you would expect that somebody would have just drawn up a blueprint and put it online by now out of memory. But from what I can see of the various designs they've used, there is a rhyme and a reason. They put things where they do for a reason. Catwalks are awfully where they are, murder holes and sally ports. It's a very clear design, and the architects know what they're doing. But there have been some things that they've done and abandoned over the course of building prisons in CDC that are obviously just somebody having an idea and it not working. The cells in San Quentin are so incredibly small. And bear in mind that San Quentin is an old prison. And I'm sure that somebody has seen, there's a picture that I saw of a guy like this, and that's the whole cell. And you might think he was making it look small, like he's a really big guy or something, but no. If you wanted to move from one end of the cell to the other, and your cellie was in any way standing, you had to politely, hey bro, I got to get through. Because there was no way. You had to be fully lying down in coffin status for the other guy to move around. That's obviously a strong ruling as a design capacity. What they say is that the beds that were built into the prison, or rather the beds that the architect who has most recently done, the the fire code, the zoning, all that kind of crap. He's qualified to say how many people should be in an area. They don't just build bunks willy-nilly. From there, they tack on another bunk because design capacity and actual housing capacity are different. Whenever they say that a prison is at 170% of capacity, generally, and not always, because CDC started toying with what these numbers meant in order to get around the Supreme Court at one point. Generally, they mean one bunk, so that if there's a set of bunk beds, there's nobody on the top bunk most of the time. That is the design of the prison. If it needs to overflow to where there are more inmates, they can. And the reason for that is, again, the space thing that I was talking about, the number of beds that are available. Because there were times I had problems with a bunkie. I saw other people have problems with a bunkie. My bunkie had a problem with me. People live together. And they'd go to the staff, or I'd go to the staff and say, this isn't working. Where else can I go? And with no malice whatsoever, the staff member says, you're going to have to work it out. Look, do you want to go to the hole? I can probably send you to the hole. But your options are you go up there and handle your business, or you go to the hole or a mental health crisis bed or something like that, because I don't have anywhere to put you, man. If you want to sit down on the ground and start yelling, I'm sure a sergeant will come and tell you the same thing. And then from there, we can write you up and send you to the hole. But that's generally the response that you get whenever you approach and say, hey, I don't like this guy. There's a problem. Heck, he smears feces on the wall, which literally happened to me. I had a cellie who did that to make a point. I haven't told that story yet either, but oh my goodness. Do I look a little bit haunted there? That was a nasty memory that just... You go to the cops and you say, hey, I don't like this guy. I want to move. And their general response, and I talked about this in the Shane Goldsby video, it's why I have no doubt, leave us alone. And you get that a lot, and it's fair. There are some guards that are straight. Sorry for anybody that I offend by calling that out. But here's the thing. Dude, inmates, we are a whiny bunch of dudes. And I mean, even active guys. Even active guys that, we have the rule, we don't talk to the cops. Dude, I guarantee you, whenever he does, he's asking for something. I'm not sure if I told this story, but there was one time that I went up to a cop and, what was it? Oh, there was an open cell. There was an open cell, and I was talking about my cellie and I moving down to it or something like that. And I hit him up and I said, hey, officer, whatever his name was, I want to move down to that cell, man. What do you say? And he looked at me and went, dude, channel, right? Hey, I'm paraphrasing. I doubt he called me dude, but you get the idea. Inmate, channel, right? And I go, yeah. He goes, you've been in my building 2-3 weeks, man? You cannot already be asking me for a move. I got nothing for you, dude. Again, with the dude today. And so I look at him and I go, sir, I'm not arguing the point, but if you check, I think I've been in the building for almost a year. I'm over there with Scooby. And he looks and he thinks, he goes, oh, yeah, man, whatever you want, no problem. Just don't bother me again for 9 months or so. You're good, whatever you need. And that is the attitude that a lot of them have is, get off my leg, essentially. And it's because they're in a position of authority and other people aren't. And if you want something, I mean, heck, consider the female officer. How many guys, and I don't mean that they're harassing her. I don't mean they're, what's the term? Eye rape. I heard it called eye rape in CDC, where you look a girl up, but you're a little deliberate, a little rude about it. And it is rude to do that, to be clear, but they'll get you in CDC for that if you happen to be the type who likes to ogle the girls. Be very polite and do it from a distance and don't comment or anything like that. I've heard stories, and maybe the guy's lying, but I've heard stories of guys just getting their lives ruined over that. I had one friend who, we'll tell that story another time, but he ended up in an argument with a female officer, and that was the first step. Let's see here. The worst cellie I ever had, the poop smearer. I should not have to think about that. Other cellie that I had, the It tells me that we're reconnecting. I'm going to keep talking and hope that it's working. The poop smear was the third worst celly that I had, very, very sadly. The second worst celly is the guy they moved me into because I told him, look, I don't care. Get me out of this cell. They didn't. So I dropped to 602 and had my family start calling and saying, hey, are you honestly telling me there's no place to put him that doesn't have poop on the walls? It still took 2 days after the first phone call, but it did get taken care of. Unfortunately, as often happens whenever you make a point, you argue with the cops, and you demand your rights, boy, they picked a bad place to put me in. And this is the guy who there's a point where I legitimately thought he was going to murder me. I woke up to a loud crash, and his TV was on the floor, and I saw the TV and the pieces were shattering, and I looked at the TV, and he reached down and snatched up a chunk of the side of the TV about as big as your fist, and he already had his hands wrapped. That's whenever I realized what was going on, because that's whenever I snapped up. I'll pick that up, I suppose. Look, I didn't die. I'm not scarred up, and it didn't go. Well, actually, it was awful. I was going to say it didn't go too bad from there, but that was a nasty. Kind of told my wife I'd save that story for whenever I didn't know what else to talk about, and I don't want to just go telling it at random, as interesting as it is. How many people actually had that moment in their lives? My God. I wanted to thank anybody who's actually tuning in for the live stream, and of course the guys who watch later to some degree. But dude, thank you to you guys. I know there's only a couple, and I know my audio is terrible, and I think that my white balance keeps going in and out. I think you guys are watching me turn from white to blue in the background or something. I'm going to keep doing this. It's going to get better, and I really appreciate the guys who are there and watching. I will be doing this in a year, 2, 3. I mean, YouTube's paying me now. It's almost nothing, but that's what you expect. You don't get rich doing YouTube, and I was doing this for free. But I'm sure not going to quit now that they're paying me. So thanks for riding along with me, and I mean that as sincerely as I can. I said a little thing in the comments or the description of this video, and I'm sure later on I'll do this kind of thing again for the 40 guys watching, and I'll mean it then too, but this time I mean it to the 10 guys or whatever it is. Thanks. I'll be honest, I had thought that I was going to be talking about opening up G-Yard for a whole hour, because that's what I told y'all I was going to do, and we're a half hour in. I'm still getting this improv thing. I guess I can talk about shutting down A-Yard, the yard that we moved from A-Yard to D-Yard, and it wasn't just like me and a couple of friends. We knew the move was coming. They told us the move was coming for a month. And so for a month, people were doing things like, okay, well, I can't buy too many soups in the canteen because we're going to be moving. Or, well, I'd better take these drugs and, give them to my homies because I don't know how serious the search is going to be when we get there. That's an extreme example, but yes, that is a concern for anybody dealing, and there are a couple of guys doing that on any yard because there's a demand. Hey, Ma, send me a couple $100. There's at least a couple of guys that get away with that anytime they want. From there, that's enough to fuel a black market. A-Yard, whenever we shut it down, one really interesting thing happened. The guy almost got away with it. You see, he was an electrician. And whenever I talk about hustles, this is one that I mention occasionally. I'm going to do videos on because it's so cool. I don't mean electrician as in he wired homes as we think of an electrician in here. He knows the various numbers of impedance and conductivity. I mean that he was an electrician, like you brought him your electronics and he'd fix them. And this is a common hustle in prison for guys that know how to do it. I always wanted to learn how to do it, and I never actually got the opportunity to. What you do is, first step is you got to make yourself a soldering gun, and that's tricky. But if you get yourself a transformer out of like a typewriter or something like that, you can rig one up. From there, getting things like solder and electrical tape, well, you pretty much just get that from scavenging it from other people's stuff and from people who happen to be working back in. I'll absolutely talk about new and old Corcoran in a minute. Einherjar, thank you. Einherjar, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's Nordic, but Swedish? I like to get people's names right, and there was no way I was going to get that right on the first try, so I got sidetracked there. The gentleman was an electrician, and he was curious to steal one of the digital thermometers that they had on the high on the walls there on A yard. So he rigged it up where his friend held his hips, and he kind of leaned out over the rail right before the cops announced we were going to be packing to move, because it was going to be a process. We knew we'd be moving that day, but we also knew they'd be moving a couple hundred inmates, and they did that every day for a week to move the full 1,000 inmates off of the yard. Moving a couple hundred people and all their property, especially whenever, this guy has 40 books that he doesn't want to lose, and that guy has, for some reason, a bunch of hoarded stuff from a kitchen. It takes time. He tried to time it right. He pulled it out of the thing right clean whenever they were doing one group and another. And I'm sure his plan had been, whenever he got to the next place, to find some neutral spot and just drop it off. Because once it was on the new yard, if he was able to hide it properly, there's no way they were going to find it. It's very hard to find something. I suppose if they broke out the metal detectors and did a grid search and checked all the little places, but they don't like to do that. Sometimes they just pretend something didn't go missing rather than do that. He stole the digital thermometer right before his group was called to get onto the cart and take their stuff to G yard. He was all the way to just about out of the building whenever the announcement came out. All right, everybody stop right where you are. So long as that thing gets put back where it came from in the next 15 minutes, we don't care. We're moving people today. But 15 minutes from now, we're stopping all movement, and anybody who moved in the past this little while, we are tearing your stuff apart. Same for anybody still in the building. And, oh, yeah, it got put back where it was supposed to be real quick. That is a common tactic in prison. If the person who did this doesn't fess up, we'll punish everybody harshly. They'll figure it out. Somebody will be angry about the cell phone they lost, the naked pictures they lost, hell, maybe the dope that got found and picked them up a charge. And they'll go find the dude who did the jackass thing, like steal a digital thermometer. This doesn't always work, of course. If you imagine the Aryan Brotherhood called in, we need all the weapon stocks stolen out of this area and buried here. And I'm being glib. I don't know that kite goes out, but that type of thing, something that's organized by a gang and is criminal activity, covert criminal activity, as it were. There's no way the administration is going to say, and we're going to search, and that the guys doing this are going to care. They're already engaged in a degree of criminality that it circumvents the threat of we're going to search. They're already aware of the possibility of a search. But if you're just frank and you want to get away with something and they announce that, you absolutely get real scared, because that very same criminal gang who isn't afraid of the search, well, they don't want to endure the search either. And a great way to make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen frivolously, that whenever the cops announce, okay, if the guy who stole the candy bars out of the canteen doesn't give them back, we're going to search, because Frank over there has almost $2,000 worth of heroin hidden in a can. He doesn't care about the couple of candy bars, but it's not like he's going to replace them either. So if the cops come in and search, well, if you made that decision on your own, you should be prepared that some people are going to be very upset that you made that decision on your own. And, in California prisons, at least in the time I was doing time, that very upset, yes, it's the wet end of a knife a lot of the time, and not all the time. I hear this sold, and I try not to sell it, that CDC was so dangerous that, you hugged your cellie in the morning and you went out to yard because you didn't know if you'd make it home that night. Well, actually, there were legit 1 or 2 times that happened, but it's a rare occurrence. I heard somebody who had been in combat tell me it was the most boring thing in the world. It wasn't. And I completely understand that sentiment in a very different framework. Because prison, if I wanted to give you a word, it's not bloody or hardcore or violent. It's boring. Oh, boring. bare walls. They're this off gray concrete. And you just stare at them. Maybe you have a book, but how long can you actually read? I mean, look, I can read a long time and I get bored. I love books. I know other guys, they went crazy as soon as I said, well, here's a book. I went, well, I don't want a book. Or maybe you have a TV. Great, I love TV too. That's cool. You have The Simpsons. But how long? At some point, you turn these things off. You go, okay, so I'm just wasting my life watching TV and reading books and playing cards. I don't want to waste my life. I should do something. Sorry, dude, you wasted your life whenever they sent you to prison for fill in the blank years. That you already lost that. And it starts to eat at you, maybe not on day 1 or day 10, but do a year, do 5 years. And you start hearing that clock ticking, the things you should have done, didn't do. And that book, it's not fun anymore. So now maybe you have a textbook. Cool, you're trying to get somewhere. How long can you do that before you're back staring at the walls again? Even students in I'm serious ones that go there to be doctors and lawyers. Well, geez, you can't study 16 hours a day. You can't. You're going to go crazy. You need to unwind somehow. Nope, no unwinding, man. It's prison. You're already there. Do your time. It's a real difficult thing to wrap your head around, and the longer that time stretches, the more you hear that ticking clock. You start saying, I'm going to get out and I'm going to show them all. They'll see. I shouldn't be here. And I don't mean me. I mean literally every dude that was locked up behind those walls has thought this, felt this. And you get out. And it's hard. We all know it's hard. A lot of guys get worn down. They give up. I want to know what recidivism is, in my opinion, and it's 100 things, and some of it is just guys getting out to commit crimes. Some of it is guys that can't kick the drugs. What I saw from a lot of guys, and I have friends that paroled, and I talked to them about either what sent them back or what didn't. And it's that feeling of there's just nothing I can do to get ahead that I think a lot of people feel anyways outside of prison. It wears you down more. And I understand that some guys straight give up. Fine. It's called a catastrophism. It's bad. I should give up because it's only going to get worse and I might as well take it to 10 right now. The lifeboat theory is an example of that whole philosophy. Catastrophism. You and your friend are in a lifeboat and there's only a given amount of water and you don't know whenever help is going to come. How quick do either of you start doing the math on, well, what do we mean we don't know how long it is for water to come? Or in another example, perhaps you and your friend are getting arrested and the cop says, well, we're going to give you forever in prison if you don't rat on your friend. You go, oh my God, forever. That's a long time. It's the willingness to make these long-term decisions that can't be taken back based upon how awful something is at that very moment. That's what I see and what I saw making people go, well, I might as well just jump out the car and rob a liquor store. I don't know what else to do. Let's take it to 10. Because tomorrow is going to be worse. Tomorrow I won't have a car and a gun. And it is a flawed logic. But some people hold on to it. And that combined with that parole. Whenever I was on parole, I needed to get my Social Security card to work. It's a little thing. Everybody has their paperwork. I was in prison for a long time. I don't have any of that stuff. First step was a birth certificate. That's pretty easy to get. I managed that. Went to get my Social Security card. I wanted to get a job. Like I'm actively looking for a job, and I am pulling in a couple of bucks here and there because I am able to work. It's just I don't have my Social Security card. So most places can't hire you without 2 forms of ID for the W-2s and the I-4 and all that. I went and got my Social Security card, which takes just a little bit of time. It's like 2 weeks to get it in the mail. No big deal. I was okay. I had friends and family that were going to support me. But I was planning on having my Social Security card that day, and whenever I checked the mailbox, they had somehow made a mistake and sent me somebody else's Social Security card. It arrived in official stuff. I called the administration immediately and told them, hey, you sent me the wrong thing. And they went, oh, my goodness, here's what you do. I filled out a form on the phone, and then I had to go back and reapply. It took another 3 weeks. No big deal. I was not even worried about it. I had my wife and my mom and my social network. For somebody else, that 3 weeks between whenever they could get the job and whenever they could get the job, well, you might as well just go out and rob a liquor store. It's too late. That 3 weeks is you losing your home. And it's that catastrophism. It's the decision to just throw it all away on that moment. And I don't have a point here what causes people to go back to prison. I honestly rambled a little, but I suppose I'll go ahead in your everyday life right now. In your everyday life? Be careful of that thinking, that catastrophism. There's no going back, so I might as well rob a liquor store, get divorced, cheat on my wife, quit my job, tell my boss what I really think of him. I don't know what the thing is, that major decision. But don't do it because you don't have any other choices unless you're really, really, really sure there are no other choices, because this is what judges tell inmates. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I wish I could take it back. And they say, well, do 5 years and tell me that, because you get another chance in 5 years to not do it. You can't take it back. That's the whole point of take it to 10. I might as well do everything I can and rob a liquor store, or because I don't have any other options. You went there. You went all the way. I had it suggested to me whenever I was discussing psychology with one of the friends that I had that I used to walk laps with in prison, Mark, smart guy. It was his opinion that the thrill-seeking behavior that is common amongst sociopaths, narcissists, that dark triad, it's very common that they reach out and they just look for anything to get a rush. Maybe shoplifting is a common one. They don't want the thing, or maybe they do, but they'd steal it anyway. Some others are aggressive. They need to get in fights. But it's that risk-seeking where the only time that you really feel alive is whenever something bad could happen to you. The only time you feel alive is when your life is at risk. That's very common in that dark triad: serial killers, serial rapists, the nastiest people. Mark suggested that to a lesser degree, that thrill-seeking behavior is why so many inmates have a take it to 10 response. That whenever you poke them in the chest, rather than responding by maybe pushing you back, as most adult men would do if aggressed upon, they pull out a knife and put the wet end somewhere between your sternum and your throat while screaming, "Who's the expletive now?" It's because they have this constantly restrained thrill-seeking impulse and whenever you have that kind of impulse, that I don't care, an itch, I guess is how we can describe it. And you always restrain it like an alcoholic who doesn't drink. I think the term is a dry drunk. Well, you heard him say, once I take a shot, I might as well just keep drinking. I've heard violent men say, well, if we fight, I might as well just kill you. I've had that said to one of my very last bunkies said that to my face and in a very polite way. And I even understood what he was saying. He was right. He was serving a term of life without the possibility of parole, and he was hoping to eventually get out. A fist fight is a life sentence for him. I mean, it's an extra 10 years on his term. I understood what he was saying. Do you think that if I had disrespected him in some way, I'd said, well, I don't think you'll do that. And he had punched me in the face because his ego, his personal sense of right and wrong of who he was would require him to break my nose for me if I disrespected him like that? Well, from there, why stop? He's going to be back in the hole, back in a cell in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years thinking about that fight. It's just guaranteed he's going to be seeing my name on paperwork whenever the parole board tells him, and you can't go home because that fight you had with Aaron. You remember that? And he's going to write his mom or his sister, sorry, honey, I'll come home next year, 3 years, 5 years. Yeah, he might as well just finish it off. It's not going to be that big of a difference to the board, maybe a couple of years one way or the other. But in his mind, he's thinking, I might as well take it to 10. Once you take that first shot, you might as well just keep drinking. Gosh, I've been talking for a while. I said that I was going to talk about the difference between New Corcoran and Old Corcoran. They're actually referred to as the same prison complex in internal documentation sometimes. And it's interesting because if that's true, because they do touch, there is actually, I'm told, at least a tunnel that goes between them, and you could throw a rock at some points and from Old Corcoran and hit New Corcoran. They're not far away from each other by any means. At least I think you could throw a rock. It's very close. It's not a long ways. As I understand it, if it is the same prison complex, it's the largest one in the world, which is interesting to have been housed at the largest prison complex in the world. Now, mind you, if they're individual prisons, the SHU. And this is a very famous SHU. This is where they have all of the real high-profile gang members, is the Corcoran SHU. In the early 90s, whenever they broke up the gangs, they got all the leaders, the Aryan Brotherhood and the BDF and the MA and all the guys that if an officer disrespected them, that officer's family would be hurt. The real high-ranking members, they rounded them up over the course of a short period of time and sent them to the Pelican Bay SHU and the Corcoran SHU in the early 90s. The reason they did this was to break up the gangs, to get some authority back. That's what Old Corcoran is famous for. Later, CDCR. This was during a booming economy in California, and it was during the tough on crime era, where it was promised that if we sent enough people to prison for long enough, we'd be safe. There were a lot of guys in prison for a long time. I'm not sure if we were safer or not. That's a debate for, I suppose, somebody wiser or at least better paid than myself. But I can tell you that the result was that prisons became brutally overcrowded. I talked about it earlier. They almost doubled the population in a short period of time, or at least increased it by a third. So they're building all these prisons, and one that they built was SATF across the street. The initial intent being that SATF would be a prison for people to go and get drug programs, things like that. They had something called the Walden House, and I looked at some of the documentation for it. It was just a rehab, basically. And then they would have more secure facilities as they needed people to be more like inmates and less like people in a rehab. It was a neat idea for CDC, but you keep tossing inmates into a fixed area, and soon you have a whole new prison, New Corcoran, and it's just another prison. It's like Old Corcoran, except it's New Corcoran. I didn't do time at Old Corcoran, but I understand the place is pretty nasty. It's one of those pens that's dirty and falling apart. New Corcoran was essentially what you'd expect from a prison built in the past 20 years. Lots of concerns for lines of sight, for there being no blind spots, and very little concern for, like I said, whether or not I was going to bump into my neighbor's bump whenever I stretched my arm out. New Corcoran wasn't the last pen that I did time at, since I'm just talking about pens that I was at. After New Corcoran, where I contracted coccidioidomycosis. If you hear me a little hacky, incidentally, one of the major reasons why is that I ended up with a little bit of a lung problem whenever I was at SATF, because I got the disease and I got real bad joint pain, and I put in medical slips. They wouldn't do anything. Finally, it cured on itself. I overcame it, I guess. I didn't become so ill that I died, which is the standard by which you were cured in CDC. I was then later tested or no, they saw my my positive test and contacted me and asked why I hadn't been treated. And I explained I was waiting for treatment, and they put me on a high-risk medical standing, and I was shipped to Chino, where they had advanced facilities to deal with things like coccidioidomycosis. Valley fever is what it's called more commonly, excuse me. It's a fungal infection of the lungs and bones, and it's painful and often fatal. It ruined a lot of lives there in SATF. I had a good friend who came this close to dying. I believe he said he was just over 100 pounds whenever the antibiotics kicked in, and he was on 3 different antibiotics, 1 on an IV, and he started recovering at that point, but that he had been in the ICU and very close to death. It's a nasty disease, and they shipped me to Chino to treat it, except that I was already cured. I got there, I had a test, and they went, "Oh, well, you're fine. You've been fine." And I told them I understood that, but they would not allow me. I was stuck at Chino after that. I stayed there for, I guess 2 years, maybe 3. It was a while. And then finally, I had my last move, or just in the last couple of months that I was incarcerated, they sent me to Chowchilla. I still don't know why they sent me to Chowchilla right at the end of my term. I had a 270-day endorsement where any time in that 9 months they were allowed to send me to that prison, Chowchilla. On literally the 270th day, I got told, "Channel, pack your stuff. It's 9 p.m. right now, and we need you on a bus before midnight." It was pretty unique. They actually held me in the holding area from midnight to 5, and then put me on a bus first thing. I don't know why myself and the one other inmate had to transfer on that very last day of our endorsement, but we both did. And then I paroled from Chowchilla. That was the end of my term. I did about 6 months there, I think. I keep meaning to go through all of my letters and actually write down, thanks, because if nothing else, those little watch hours help YouTube pay me, so I got more time for this stuff, and especially to my patrons. Again, thank you, because it's what's making it so I can do this, basically. There's only 6.5 minutes left in my live stream. I appreciate everybody that hung in. If there's anybody who wants to shout out a question, this is your last point. Or I'm probably going to ramble on about some random thing about prison. The one prison, or rather I suppose facility, that I haven't really spoken about yet is county jail. County jail was some of the worst time for me. And whenever I started talking about prison, doing the California convictions things, I very deliberately left it out. It was a rough time. And I'm sure that I will talk about it more in the future. But one of the difficulties about county jail, especially if you have a case that people know about, and for whatever reason people knew about my case, there are a lot of guys there that are looking for an angle. And a great angle is if they can get any tiny piece of information about your case from you, and then tack on a couple of lies on top of that, maybe think about something, take a guess about what might have happened. Maybe they can tack actual years off their sentence, because district attorneys in cases that are difficult are way prepared to deal. This happened to my co-defendant to some degree, Ty. I don't have the exact details on what happened except what Ty told me and what's in the police report. But to some degree, he was absolutely conned by a jailhouse informant. The same guy later tried to con me. It didn't work out. He didn't get any information, and whenever he tried to go to the police with the same information that he had from Ty, they told him he didn't care. But I absolutely did have a conversation where I was sitting across the table from somebody who, I knew was hoping maybe I'd let something drop. And it seems like a small thing, but do remember this is literal life or death. They're talking about the death penalty. It's isolating. And I was definitely withdrawn, perhaps in my own shell, perhaps partially because, I was 20 years old and I got arrested and I was not prepared for the exigencies, the realities of incarceration. I did adapt. I feel that I did reasonably well, especially later in my term as far as these things are concerned. But initially, it was a low-grade panic attack most days, and it was bad time. I will elaborate on doing time in county jail sometime in the future, and I think that a lot of guys who have done time will say, "Oh yeah, county was awful. Once you get to prison, things aren't so bad." Hey, thanks, Corey. It's funny, evening channel. Every time that I see channel now, I wonder if people are speaking about me or about my YouTube channel. It is amusing as time goes on. I suppose people will say, Aaron channel, and I'll have to look up wondering if they mean my YouTube channel or not. Of course, the end of my time in county jail, and I've spoken about it in a video, but they woke me up just first thing in the morning very soon. Most people who are sentenced in county jail, it's a week, a month, it's a long time to get moved to prison. Oh, they got me right through. I may actually have a record from the day you were sentenced, from the day they finished your sentencing, to the day that you hit the mainline yard you're on, because I made it through San Quentin in, I think, 34 days, and I had only been in county jail for 3 days after they sentenced me. That is a phenomenally fast turnaround on both points. This has been a pretty productive live stream. I wanted to thank everybody for coming in one final time, and I'm going to start wrapping up. Yeah, absolutely, DC. I did time on DGIM and EGIM at SATF in 2007, 2008. I wouldn't be surprised if I was there at the same time as whoever you might know that was there then. You can toss it out in the comments. Thanks, everyone, for watching. The live stream will continue to post at about 5 p.m. PST, that's 1700, and it should last for about an hour. I'll keep doing it, and not just this, but all these different means by which I'm communicating with you. I'll keep doing it, and you keep watching. Thank you. And now I have to find the button. It's always so. Thank you again.